Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. I had another video in mind for this month, but in the wake of the US election, I decided I want to focus on something else. It's something I've noticed for years, and it's only gotten all the stronger over the last few months. It's the rampant polarization and radicalization I've been seeing from people all around me, both on the right and on the left. Someone asked me if I would consider doing a video on how to de-radicalize yourself, and more I have felt that an in-depth discussion on all of this would be a good thing to have. First, however, I'd like to start by doing a video describing what I see as the process of polarization and radicalization themselves. I want to start by talking about this a little more generally. Of course, I have spoken before about the in-group, out-group bias, and the tendency to view those of your in-group as much more unique, individual, and positive, and all those from your out-group to be much more the same as each other, and much more prone to negative attributions. This has been a tendency we have had essentially as long as we have existed. It makes sense that this would have been something we would have developed, as it would have helped us to distinguish between friends and strangers, who we could never be too sure as to whether they were a threat or not. Now, let's be real here. This was never something that was going to go away, and as much as I think some of us like to look at certain periods of history through rose-colored glasses and say that there was ever a time that was better or more harmonious, well, I think the same belief structures were there. They just might not have been quite as prominent or quite as socially acceptable to talk about openly. However, at the same time, I think we can all look back even as little as a decade and think to ourselves, geez, it never used to be this bad, did it? I remember when I was younger, and it was in fashion amongst my peers to make fun of the right, especially the religious right, and take playful jabs at their unrealistic, out-of-touch views. Don't worry, I have since developed a more balanced view of the issues, and I don't view things as simplistically as I did back then. Regardless, as far as I know, most of us never went out of our way to be directly rude to people who held different beliefs, and we didn't ostracize friends if they belonged to the wrong political group. The various popular crowds in my high school contained a definite mix of kids with left-wing and right-wing political beliefs, and even our valedictorian was and is to this day quite conservative. Looking at the current political climate in academia, this would be almost unthinkable these days. In general, these days there doesn't seem to be as much a political spectrum as a political binary, and a highly disparate binary at that. These days, one political side is good, one political side is evil, and there's really no in between. And before anyone says that this view is characteristic of the left only, it's definitely not. I've seen plenty of right-wing people expressing the same sorts of views. We don't see lighthearted jabs or mere passionate discussion between political rivals. In fact, we're lucky if we see political rivals interacting whatsoever. The internet has made it altogether too easy to just stop seeing the kinds of opinions you don't care to see. I think prior to the internet, and especially prior to social media, there were really two main approaches to political topics. First, we had to hash things out like reasonable adults when controversy arose. After all, when it comes to family, work, and even to a certain extent one's friend circles, if you didn't want to end up jobless and completely alone, you learned how to manage these subjects with a minimum of 4-letter words and without calling everyone Hitler. Realistically, when interacting with an actual human being, I think most people would be surprised to find that it actually doesn't feel that great to just run your mouth and act like a jerk willy-nilly. Alternatively, there was the forbidden subjects approach, where we made like Fight Club and didn't talk about religion or politics. We just went about our regular daily business, without trying to stir up some sort of controversy wherever we went. I know, wild concept, right? People just talked about menial subjects like how their week has been or what they made for dinner the previous night. I don't think it was uncommon for people to have no idea about the political views of their coworkers. I'm not convinced this wasn't a better state of the world, actually. However, I think with the whole feminist and critical theories notion of the personal is political, or as of recently, everything is political, this has kind of prevented people from taking this approach even if they wanted to. There is now this pressure to share one's political views openly, with lines like "silence is violence" being common. People who prefer not to get involved are accused of all kinds of things, such as having the privilege to ignore subjects that affect others, and people who are insufficiently polarized are accused of being enlightened centrists or fence-sitters, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I really don't think we were meant to be continually exposed to these kinds of emotionally charged topics on such a regular basis. There is plenty of research that demonstrates the ways that social media causes us to feel more depressed. I would be absolutely shocked if it wasn't also the case that constantly being exposed to these regular, highly aggressive political posts at the very least spikes anxiety, if not a whole host of other negative side effects, to say nothing of its effects on friendships and other relationships. And there's really a kind of psychological 1-2 punch with social media and getting people into even more polarized positions too. First, social media algorithms see to it that whatever kinds of things you see and actually like and interact with, you see more of that, meaning you get introduced to more people and ideas and entertainment that tend to align with your worldview. This allows you to carefully curate the kinds of things you expose yourself to on a regular basis, so whether deliberately by cutting out all other views you disagree with, or accidentally by simply filling all of your time up with the media with which you align, you wind up hearing only the same kinds of things over and over, and it's all designed to give you that little endorphin rush by confirming all of the things you believe about the world. Second, along with social media came the ability to hide and block other people. Now, I think that initially, in the early days of the internet, this was used more genuinely to cut out people who were legitimately harassing or bothering you. But I think as time has gone on, it has become yet another tool to push people further into their political corners. Even people who were once best friends can fall victim to it. With enough time spent interacting on social media rather than in person, it can make them feel more and more like they are different kinds of people with absolutely nothing in common, rather than two otherwise very similar people with just slightly different political views. I know this from experience. Someone I once considered my best friend moved clear across the country from me, and I have watched her become more and more polarized and radicalized online. Trust me, it's not a good feeling when a mutual friend shows you that your once closest friend is now making posts to everyone but you about what she should do about you, just because you happen to have a different opinion. Especially the little peanut gallery underneath who knows nothing about the history of our relationship telling her to just discard me like used tissue paper. This is hardly the only example of this. I have seen many people, and I'm sure you have too, making posts saying, "Delete me if you believe or don't believe X opinion." People sharing ever more polarized and aggressive opinions and memes, and being rewarded with likes and supportive comments, while any dissenters are, at best, shouted down and, at worst, deleted and blocked. Radicalization is being pushed as though it is a good thing, regardless of political side. I think this is being exacerbated by the kind of messaging becoming prominent in our society that certain kinds of people have privilege based on their immutable characteristics, making division more likely as it becomes more acceptable to hate the people in the supposed privileged positions, regardless of whether any individual person belonging to said group actually holds any real measure of privilege. Doubly true if you can envision that these privileged individuals belong to the political class you disagree with. So you have people who begin to justify behaviors like discrimination and racism because they're supposedly okay when people are punching up, and then you have people who are the victims of these behaviors justifiably beginning to get a little defensive about it. Maybe these people start speaking out, start trying to advocate for themselves, or start challenging the notion that we should divide ourselves based on these oversimplified lines. They may receive any number of responses, including dismissal. "It's our turn to speak, so just sit down." Defensiveness. "See, I told you they were all a bunch of angry, insert relevant descriptor here." Deflecting. "No, of course we don't mean all insert relevant descriptor here. But if you're complaining about it, we probably mean you." Or otherwise doubling down on their original discriminatory position. Both groups become more defensive and aggressive in turn, and the downward spiral continues. Then politicians can use this to their advantage and try to appeal to certain groups, and when they start to garner support, the other political side, again, this does happen on both sides, sees this as ever-increasing evidence that their opposition is less like them, against them, standing in their way, or even straight-up evil. This then feeds back into the social media echo chamber building, where people begin making demands of their friends to vote for the political option they view as not being evil, or accusing people who do vote for that person of being hateful or even dangerous. It doesn't matter if a person wants to vote for the evil politician because of unrelated factors like they appreciate their views on international trade or something. People's personal interests are dismissed in favor of broad statements of good versus evil. This tends to result in one of three scenarios. 1. A person will be cowed by these statements and will change their vote out of guilt. 2. A person becomes indignant and even more entrenched in their views and will either ignore, argue with, or delete and/or block the person making demands. Or 3. A person will stay silent or even claim they agree with the poster to maintain the peace, but will then vote for the person they really support secretly. So what we have here is a growing population of people who are afraid to share their political views, and those who are left are mostly those who are expressing the very strong opinions I discussed before. This then results only further in a society where political polarization is normalized. Both sides increasingly view the opposite side as foreign and malevolent, and we become so unfamiliar with what it's like to respectfully interact with another human with mild to moderately different views from our own, and to have our views respected in turn, that we just stop bothering. Wow, dude, this has been kind of a depressing video to write. Now, granted, I haven't done a formal study on this subject. This video is kind of a combination of other studies I've researched and personal observations that I've had over the past few years with my own friends and family, but it all does seem to follow and feed into itself very well. It's disheartening, and it's really easy to get to a place of feeling helpless about it all. But I'm hoping in my next video we can talk a little bit about some strategies we can all use to try to combat this in our lives. Don't get me wrong, I'm not claiming to have some secret path to fix the world, but you know me, I'm always about trying to put power back in the hands of the individual whenever I can, and if I can help people to find some ways to feel like they have a little control over their lives, I'll consider that a success. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.